You died. Hello, and welcome back to the early 80s. It's Pat and Joey for RetroWare TV here at the Video Game History Museum booth at E3, where they have lots of retro wares. All sorts of games, video games for the 70s, 80s, 90s.
And today, almost.
Not so much, but basically we're here to give you a little bit of a tour and show you some of the more rare stuff that they've got on sale.
Consoles.
Not on sale. But.
No, they're not on sale. We're talking consoles, rare games, prototypes, systems that were developed and never came out. Everything's here. Arcade games in the back. So me and Joe are going to be your tour guide for this retro gaming madness.
And the ghost just ate you. So the Video Game History Museum kind of ends around 2000 right now. And right here in the early 90s is my baby, the Super Nintendo. You all know about that. Moving on a little bit to around 2000, 2000 exactly I believe, no 1999, 1999 was the Dreamcast, Sega's last system. You all also know about that, but something definitely worthy of keeping track of throughout the course of video game history. Nintendo 64 is also a bit of a maligned system, especially its controllers. I think it's a little bit of a bum rap, but you know. Now, here's a little bit of a lesser known one, at least here in North America. TurboGrafx 16, specifically Devil's Crush, which is an amazing pinball game for this particular system. Definitely more popular in Japan due to a lack of advertising, or at least effective advertising, and really not even bringing the best games the system had that were developed in Japan over to North America. It kind of got overwhelmed by the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. Here's an interesting system, a Pioneer laser active Laserdisc system. Now here we have an expansion port where you can play Sega CD and Genesis games. There was also one for TurboGrafx 16. It's always interesting to see these kind of combo units whenever they come about. Of course, we have a Sega Saturn here, which Sega had a bit of a debacle in its release, although it has some really great games. Panzer Dragoon is probably one of the better known ones for this system. Unfortunately, it was kind of the beginning of the end for Sega, at least in the console market. And here we have the system that took away Nintendo's cookies and ate them, the Sony PlayStation. Really, there's not much that needs to be said about that, one of the most popular game systems in history. And then the Sega Genesis, which we all know and love, with Toe Jam and Earl, which is a pretty good game. I don't know how well it really holds up today. It just fell off the end of the world, so enough of that system. And there is a Sega Genesis in its display in all its glory, not being played, but it's kind of shiny right now, isn't it? You have your strange third-party peripherals, the Smash controller, arcade action. This is a beauty, the Sega Channel. This was way ahead of its time. You used a cable service in order to basically allow you to download, not store, but download games. You could try, you could play out. And in fact, Sega brought several games to North America that North Americans couldn't play any other way. Pulseman, Mega Man The Wily Wars were a few good examples of such. But, you know, downloadability in the 90s, who knew? Of course, the Sega CD, a bit maligned, but an interesting idea. You know, this was one of the forefronts of CD technology in the gaming sphere. Very expensive at the time, but by the time that the price came down, it was already time to move on to new systems. The Nintendo 64, the Sega Saturn, really were already out the door. Another bit of a flop might be a strong word, but not exactly successful product for Sega, the 32X, which was another add-on for the Genesis, which allowed you to play essentially 32-bit games on a 16-bit system. Better graphics and so forth. Interesting idea, but again, add-ons don't generally do very well. It doesn't matter what system they're released for. This is an interesting one I've never actually seen before. It's a Sega PDA, so to speak, an IR communicator. They let you store phone numbers and addresses. Interesting, interesting. I can see why it didn't sell too well, though. And of course, you might know this system better as the Nintendo 3DS today, but no, I'm kidding, of course. The Nintendo Virtual Boy. I had one of these. It's true, it would give you headaches if you stared at those red images in 3D for too long. An interesting idea. Didn't really have the technology to fully flesh it out. But the saddest part about that story, of course, is Gunpei Yokoi, if I'm saying that name correctly, who also developed the Game Boy, Metroid, Kid Icarus. He left Nintendo in shame because he came up with the idea for the Virtual Boy. And sadly, he was killed in a car accident just a few years later. So the Virtual Boy actually cost us one of gaming's greatest forefathers. And here we have the Sega Saturn, which you saw in action right over there. And then the 3DO, which actually had a few different manufacturers. This one's Panasonic. A bit of an interesting system. It was very expensive at the time, as most CD-based systems were. However, like any system, it has its cheer squad. So there are some interesting games for it in these long boxes that are so recognizable. Here, does anyone remember these puffy stickers that seemed so big in the 80s and so forth? You know, video game memorabilia never gets old. I mean, come on, who wouldn't want to go to school with your Missile Command, Warlords, Asteroids, just your Atari lunchbox? That's beautiful. I would use that today. I want to take this to work. And of course, the infamous boxed, unopened Custer's Revenge. Now there's some question as to whether Pat's unopened lunch from yesterday is worth more than that, but we'll leave it to you all to decide. And of course, Atari memorabilia. Pins were big in the 80s, therefore Atari had to make tons and tons of pins. Although there's an interesting one here for the Miracle piano system. That was one on the NES. ColecoVision. We have a few different ones here, mostly Atari pins, and I like this. A McDonald's and Atari crossover scratch-off game. Almost looks like a lottery ticket. I wonder if it's a winner. I'll get a crowbar and find out.
The Video Game History Museum is buzzing. This is day 3 and more people are discovering this and hanging out. You know why? Look at these awesome arcade games they have here. How about Asteroids over here? Russian Attack. I'm familiar with that one, I think. Yeah, Punch-Out. Check out WrestleFest. It was a 4-player WF game. Look at the graphics at the time here. I always loved this game. Are these on free play? I don't have any quarters on me. If you turn around, we have all these boxed systems here. I have some of them, but some really rare stuff. We have the Bally Videocade. I don't even have this one, the Astrocade. I don't even have this system. This is very hard to find. I didn't even know there were 2 different colors here. How about the Emerson Arcadia? You don't even see these come up on eBay too often. These maybe come up, I don't know, like once every few weeks. The big behemoth Atari 5200, which decent hardware, but failed because of the controllers, which were really wonky. The first analog joysticks ever created. Well, it's arguably the first video game system, the Manibox Odyssey, which really consisted of overlays you put on your TV, and you had dials to control, almost like pong paddles and balls. And basically the programming changed based upon 6 different cards you put into the system that manipulated how you can actually move the paddle and the balls and devices. But you actually kept a lot of score on paper and pad for these games. So this is right when they're starting to figure out, what's going on with video game systems. So this is about 1972 right here. How about the Atari Video Music Machine? You don't find these too often as well. Basically, you have a bunch of different tones here that you can manipulate here, and different types of, like square sounds, saw tones, and yeah, you manipulate them right here. It even says right here, they're trying to appeal to the disco psychedelic crowd with this device here. So it even has this nice shipping box right here. Really beat up, but really nice piece. The Coleco Telstar Arcade. Now Coleco put out a variety of different Pong devices. I have the Telstar Ranger. This one was strange in the fact that it had these sort of cartridges that went into the Pong system. There was a few different ones of these. So you had the little steering wheel on one side. The opposite side, you actually have the Pong controls. And look at this guy right here. This is also on the Telstar Ranger. You have the light gun, an early light gun. Look at this thing. Don't walk into a 7-Eleven with this thing. You'll get shot. Take a look at the case here of prototypes, loaner cartridges, test cartridges. You have an NES prototype right here. I can't really make out the game. What does it say? We have a N64 jet grind radio prototype. At least that's what it says right here. Who knows? A lot of times they reuse prototype cases at the companies where they're developing them, so it's hard to tell. See, we got some 2600. Here's an Atari computer prototypes right here. How about a PlayStation prototype? We have Elite. Remember Elite? For one of the first free roaming games, it was a space exploration game. So I didn't know that was even planned for the PlayStation. So when you find prototypes like this, half the time they're games that didn't even come out. So it's really a joy to find these. How about Spot, a Game Boy prototype right there? I actually found a prototype one time at a flea market of a Game Boy game, but I sold it, unfortunately. How about a Jaguar prototype? Yeah, it also has the please return, since you weren't supposed to have these leave the developer's building. Bubsy we got here, KC Munchkin advanced copy, that actually did come out. That was a Supreme Court case, since they copied Pac-Man. The Microvision was a handheld system, right here, the liquid crystal display, but it actually had interchangeable, I don't want to call them game carts, but packs that you inserted and also had the controller on it. These aren't extremely rare, but you don't find these too often. You're not going to go to a garage sale and find a lot of these there. This is, I believe, if not the complete set, close to it. I'm not up on my Microvision knowledge, but this is pretty much all the games they had. The ColecoVision right here. The ColecoVision was a pretty popular system. It was a lot more advanced than the Atari 2600, and actually had, what's this? A Nintendo game packed in, Donkey Kong, which is one of the better ports of the game, especially compared to the Intellivision and 2600 versions, which were far inferior when it came to graphics and gameplay. What about the add-ons? I actually have these. This is a sealed ColecoVision roller controller, which did come with Slither. So it was an analog trackball device right here, just like in the arcades they had for Centipede on your ColecoVision. And ColecoVision also had this funky guy right here. They had this, I have a couple of these, and I don't even know what they're even used for, really. Look at this. It looks like a space gun right here. You're shooting things with the multicolored buttons. So this is a controller that really, I think, in theory was fine, but in practice didn't really work out. One of the things Coleco did to piss off Atari was release their expansion module 1, which allowed you to play Atari 2600 games on your ColecoVision. So if you have a ColecoVision, there really isn't a point to having an Atari. This came out a little bit later into the Atari lifespan. This came out about, I want to say, 83. So by that point, the Atari 2600 was dying out, but still, Atari was not pleased over this. The original console wars started with the Mattel Intellivision. 1979, this was a fierce competitor, at least they wanted to be, to the Atari 2600, so much so that they had a vicious ad campaign against each other saying, oh, well, Intellivision can do this, with Mr. George Plimpton, Mr. Intellivision, lauding how great the games were on Intellivision versus the 2600. And the Intellivision did have superior technology going for it. It did have better graphics and sound. They actually had a synthesizer sound module that gave you some voices, which was the first voices you ever heard in video games. And these are interesting controllers they had right here. Some people love them, some people don't. Like the ColecoVision, you have a keypad here, but look at this, no joystick. Some games I believe this was pretty good for, but I don't have that much experience with the Intellivision, so that's all I'm going to say about this guy right here.
In the 80s, tabletop games were also very big, kind of like a, like a Game & Watch kind of thing, but something you could play on the table, a little bit better graphics. There are all sorts. We have a solar-powered one here, Escape from Devil's Doom. I don't even want to think about how poorly those solar cells work back in the 80s, but enough to power a little LCD game apparently. Here we have a Play Watch. Interesting. A Time and Fun. I'm sure those aren't Nintendo knockoffs. No, what are you talking about? And of course we have little Cubert. This is adorable. Ignore the phallus. It's still adorable. I would buy this for a kid if I had one. Now this is kind of interesting. We have, I mean, if you're interested in reading apparently 200-page thick bound volumes, we have some competitive brand owner studies made by Atari. Interesting. And here's the 1984 Gallup study of consumer attitudes toward and interest in owning cartridge video games. So, you know, video games and internet are serious business. So something really nice that the Video Game History Museum is doing is putting out a bunch of these old consoles for free play. And the not so old ones like the PlayStation, but here we have an Intellivision, an Astro Smash, which, not bad, you know, for early 80s bit of gaming fun. I died, so I'm done with that. Of course, the classic ColecoVision. Is this even on? Running Popeye? Select your game. The classic cell phone design, which much maligned. And Popeye's doing his thing. Did I mention I never played this one? So, death. Although we do have Donkey Kong, courtesy of Nintendo, which, you know, before the NES came out, or the Famicom, I really should say, Nintendo had looked into selling off the rights to Donkey Kong for several systems. The NES, I feel it would be a shame for me to talk about that with Pat right behind the camera, so I'm going to leave that alone for right now. The Neo Geo, very expensive system. I actually never even knew of anyone who had it. I always had the weird friends that had the TurboGrafx and stuff like that. The Neo Geo, amazing graphics for the time, which is part of the problem. But you know what's really amazing? Look at the size of those cartridges. Those are behemoths right there. Anyone who was a fan of Neo Geo back in the day will still swear by it. Trust me, I've heard from them.